Well. Kick those tires and start that virtually fake fire. Today, we welcome a man who has topped many lists. You may have seen his name on the New York Times bestseller list, or perhaps your dad's Christmas wish list. He's certainly been on my most anticipated guest list, but perhaps more so than any other, we know him from the Terminal List. He's a retired Navy SEAL and presumably someone who you never want to hear the words, "You're on my list." So please welcome the 2-syllable, 7 bestseller, potentially even more, Jack Carr to the program. Jack, thank you for being with us.
Man, that was an awesome intro. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. With great intro comes great expectation. So now the only place for you to go is down. So why don't we just get it out of the way then? So look, I definitely want to talk about your writing process. We have to talk about the Terminal List, of course, but I know you get asked this stuff a lot. So I would love to start off actually with one of my just favorite things about your story. And maybe this is a little Simon the Sorcery here, but I'm like, how on earth did you think of these like A+++ people like Chris Pratt and Anton Fuqua and just go, yeah, I want them in my stuff. And then lo and behold, years later, here you are. Like, is this just God working on your behalf, or do you secretly run an empire that we are all blissfully unaware of?
The latter, but I don't talk about it that often. But no, man, it's very natural for me as a child of the 80s, especially as I'm starting out, to think about, hey, who's going to play the lead in this film when they turn this book that I've written 2 sentences of into a film or television series, because that's just how I grew up as a fan of both thrillers as a reader and then going to movies and obviously television, and just as a child of the 80s, that, and knowing also way back then that one day after my time in the SEAL teams, I wanted to write thrillers just like the kinds that I was reading growing up. And naturally, you write a book, it becomes a #1 New York Times bestseller, and then they make it into a film, and some A-list stars a part of it. That's just was my calculus from a very early age. Certainly by 6th grade, when I read The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, short story from 1924. And even back then, I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that one day I'd write a book that paid tribute to that short story, and that was my 3rd novel, Savage Son. But as I start writing this thing, Chris Pratt he's been in a few things, but he's now well known for Parks and Rec. And then he had this very small role in Zero Dark 30 as a SEAL. So I got to see his transition from this big, fat, jovial guy in Parks and Rec to a SEAL operator. And I knew when I started, now I'm still 2 sentences into the book. And this is December of 2014 when I started writing. And I thought, you know what, this is somebody who needs to do this for their career. This guy could go places. He needs to play James Reese in the adaptation of this book that I'm 2 sentences into. And so I did that. I didn't really give it much more thought than that because I didn't know anyone in publishing, didn't know anyone in Hollywood. And at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm picking my actor. I might as well pick my director. And I thought, Antoine Fuqua. Yeah, that would be, he's the guy to direct this. Did Shooter, of course, Tears of the Sun, did Magnificent Seven, did a whole bunch of, just an amazing guy. And so years later, after I write the book, I get a call from a friend who was in the SEAL teams with me and calls me out of the blue and says, I hadn't talked to him in about 5 years. And he said, hey, do you remember me? And I said, of course I do. Jared Shaw is his name. And he said, hey man, I always wanted to thank you for what you did for me in the SEAL teams. And I couldn't even remember what it was. And then he told me, hey, you're the only person that sat me down, talked to me about getting out when I decided to get out. You introduced me to people in the private sector. Then you followed up with me and asked how it was going, asked if there's anything else you could do. No one else did that. I always wanted to thank you. And I said, yeah, man, no problem. How's it going? And he says, going great, but I heard you have a book coming out. And I said, yeah, I can send you one. It comes out in a few months. And he said, yeah, that'd be great, but I'd like to give it to a friend of mine. And I said, who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. So Chris read it and called the next week and wanted to option it. So that's pretty much how every Hollywood story begins.
So obviously now you had a list, right? To go back to this, you had Spielberg, James Cameron were all runner-ups if Anton wasn't available.
If he wasn't available. But luckily, another SEAL buddy gave him the book at a speaking event, and he read it and wanted to option it as well. He knew Chris from Magnificent Seven, and so they talked, and then here we go. Off we go to the races.
Absolutely. So again, if you had to, now, not to hyper spiritualize it, but like, do you extrapolate a principle from this of like, now this is not the interpretation of this verse in scripture, but in Hebrews, it does say, show hospitality to everyone, for some have entertained angels without knowing. Not to say that Jared is an angel, but it sounds like he definitely was a huge force in that. But is there a bigger principle there too of just like, we don't do it for the reward, but the fact is you just never know if you're kind and genuine to someone, you just never know how it's going to come back around.
Yeah, or maybe it doesn't work if you think it might come back around. Maybe it has to be natural. I don't know. But it was natural for me to want to help Jared. It was never very natural for me to want to help anybody in the SEAL teams, whether they're getting out or staying in. And that was something that I saw was a little different because I saw other people that if someone said they were getting out, they went into a different pile. Like, oh, you quit now. It's like, what do you mean? I gave 6 years, I gave 10 years, I gave 15 years of my life type of thing. I was always of the mind of, hey, if this person wants to stay in, or I'll help them. And if they're a good guy, and if they're a good guy and they're getting out, I want to help them there as well. So I didn't really give it much thought other than that's just a natural thing for me to do. And in this case, it came back around. And then that's the same way, essentially, that I got the book to Simon & Schuster. I didn't know anyone in publishing. I didn't know I needed an agent. I had no idea. But I knew I wanted to get it to someone named Emily Bessler, because in the back of Brad Thor's books, in the back of Vince Flynn's book, they're thanking someone named Emily Bessler as their editor and publisher. And so I thought, oh, great, Emily Bessler will be my editor and publisher too. And then I didn't really think about how I was going to ever get it to her. I just figured I would somehow. And then another buddy called out of the blue also, and he had gotten out of the military, got into finance, and then he had helped Brad Thor. I didn't even know this. He helped Brad Thor on a couple of his books with some of the SEAL stuff, like as a technical advisor. And he said, man, I heard you're writing a book. And I said, yeah. And he said, man, do you know who Brad Thor is? Do you want to talk to him maybe? And I said, oh man, he'll talk to me? And my buddy says, yeah, I've helped him out a little bit, and he owes me a favor, so I'll put him in touch with you. And I talked to Brad, and he said, hey, I never do this for anybody, but as a thank you for what your friend says you did in the SEAL teams, if you write this book, and at the time he was like, what are the odds of this kid actually writing this thing? I'll send it to New York. I'll let them know that it's coming. I'll let my publisher and editor Emily Bessler know that it's coming. Can't guarantee they'll open it. Can't guarantee she'll read it, if they'll want to publish it, but at least I can let them know it's coming as a thank you. And I said, that's all I need. So he said, when are you going to be done? And I said, a year from today. And then I called him back a year from then and said, it's done. So yeah, crazy. But that wouldn't have happened if I had a bad reputation in the SEAL teams. That guy would not have taken a risk on me. Same thing with Jared. If I hadn't helped out Jared, we wouldn't be where we are today, filming this spin-off series right now in Budapest and moving into the second season of The Terminal List with True Believer, which is the second book. So, but none of those things were done like, oh, if I do this, then X, Y, or Z might happen. It was just all very natural.
Oh, that's awesome. And of course, it helps you to have an amazing book too, right? At the end of the day, having something that is well written, et cetera, is, I'm sure, a little bit part of that equation.
The product has to be the best that it can possibly be. Yeah, all those other things. That's why when people are starting out down this path, whether it's screenwriting or it's writing thrillers or even the nonfiction space, so that's a little bit different. The product has to be the best they can possibly be before you worry about social media and you worry about agents and publishers and anything else, website. No, all that bandwidth needs to go into making that product the best that it can possibly be. And then probably at the beginning, you're going to have to be a little bit of a CEO, a CMO, a CFO, a content creator. You have to be doing all of those things at the beginning and then start to build and scale from there.
Now, I want to ask, you were in almost or over 2 decades, right, in serving. And by the way, thank you for your service. You spent quite a bit of time in there. Is that out of the ordinary? I feel, and I could be completely wrong here, that seems like a very long career in the SEALs, or is that fairly normative?
I'm not sure when you look at numbers wise, like at what stage people start getting out. Probably earlier on, more people get out because it is an organization that's still shaped like a pyramid, like a traditional type organization. So I bet more people get out at the 6-year mark, and then the 8-year mark, and then the 10-year. Then once you go over the 10-year mark, a lot less people get out, but you've had more people getting out up until then. So I'm not sure what it looks like number wise, but 20 years, I guess, is probably average.
I have to ask, is there something that you wish people would understand better about the SEALs? I'm always curious to get like the reality of what actually goes on behind the scenes versus our cultural impression of what Navy SEALs are. Obviously, I'm in 20 minutes north of Coronado right now, so I have a little bit of a closer look there. But again, my exposure is limited to movies and then YouTube videos of BUDS training, which I know is just the beginning. So is there anything that you think is a perception that would warrant a correction, or just something that you think would be fun for people to know?
I don't know, especially now because there's so much information out there. Let's say if you'd asked me that question in, let's say 1996 when I was just coming in, or 1998 or 2000, 2005, I'd probably have a different answer. But even back then, I was studying everything I could possibly find on special operations, on SEALs. in particular, ever since I was a little kid, because I knew from 7th grade on that I wanted to be a SEAL. Even before that, I knew I wanted to serve in the military. So I've always had it in my blood, in my DNA. That was my path. And my mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. So I am reading everything I can find on special operations. And back then, a lot of it was focused on Vietnam because it was such a watershed time in special operations history. So there were a couple of videos out there, SEALs in Vietnam. There were a few books. There's a lot more books probably on Army Special Forces out of Vietnam. There were SEALs, and then that shifts, I think, a little bit after the War on Terror kicks off. But so it's hard for me to say because my perception was always based upon all available information that I could possibly get at that given time, whether it was 1985, 87, 90, 93, whenever that was. I was just soaking in all that information and didn't really think of it in terms of what's the public perception. It's more so, how am I going to be the best operator and leader that I can possibly be? How am I going to be a student of warfare, always learning, always adapting? So I never really thought of it in terms of what's the misconception. Yeah, maybe that every SEAL's the same. I guess that might be it, where really I think our strength comes from, obviously you're going through this thing called BUDS, Hell Week. It's testing if you want to be there, if you have the mental fortitude to be there, but it doesn't really test for character, it doesn't really test for anything else other than are you tough enough? And then once you get to the SEAL teams, people are coming from so many different backgrounds. And I think that really, when it came time for the War on Terror, so after obviously September 11, 2001, and you're having people bring their backgrounds to a particular problem set and apply whatever that past experience was, not just the experience of BUDS and SEAL qualification training and how to run an AW, how to run a semi-automatic weapon, how to make comms on a radio, how to jump out of planes, how to do the sniper stuff. Not necessarily that, but really what they brought from before the SEAL teams in. Where did they grow up and what are their skill sets? Some people have never seen the ocean until they joined the Navy. Some people are amazing surfers or water polo players. Some people are like Rhodes Scholars. They're coming in enlisted. Some people are just out of high school, like last week, and everything in between. So you have so much like intellectual diversity and experience diversity. People working on cars their whole life or tractors their whole life and can know that stuff and can fix engines. And you know, someone that has no idea how to do that stuff, but they've been hunting their whole life, or they have some sort of a skill set that allows them to do these certain things that now when there's a mission and you're looking at it and trying to figure out how to essentially role play the enemy, figure out how the enemy's adapting to what you've done up to this point and how you're going to do differently going forward, then you have all of this kind of intellectual diversity focused on how to prosecute this target set. So I think that's probably was our main strength after September 11th, is that we weren't this strict military, but I found that more that creativity, that aggressive problem solving tinged with creativity, that was our strength.
Interesting. So my profinity for Shakespearean literature, would that be a welcome skill set to the team? If we ever have to go into combat with any 16, going back into UK history or anything like that?
Hey, remember Braveheart? Nice speech. Yeah.
That's right. Oh yeah, no, actually he's great. He spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. Randall Wallace, if you haven't heard his address, it's one of the best speeches I've ever heard. And he wrote it at the absolute lowest point in his life. He basically I think lost his job. He was financially stressed, and he got down on his knees and he said, Lord, if I'm going out, like, let me go out fighting. And he's like, and that's when I rose up, I dusted myself off, and I just knew in my soul, everything was going to be okay. And he's like, I sat down and I penned the words to Braveheart. And it's really, and at the very end too, he tells everyone, right? He's like, and lying in your beds many years from now, right? Would you be willing to trade all the days, right? And the whole audience chimes, and it's just beautiful. And you're like, oh, every man dies, but not every man truly lives.
That's it. So that stuff comes in handy.
All right, good. Well, I'm glad if everybody. I'm curious, do you, like, I've always wondered too, because some of the training, some of the Hell Week stuff designed to weed people, I go, are there people who, like, you think have the mental fortitude but lack the physiological, like, for example, I do wonder, like, when I hear some of David Goggins stuff, I'm like, I think some people, no matter how much they will themselves, like, their shins would just go out. They can't, like, I'm a mind over matter person to an extent, but I do wonder if, like, some people's bodies are just not meant to go through this.
Right. Yeah. And that's the idea behind the different phases of training. So that first phase is really testing, hey, are you tough enough to be here, essentially? Then you move into that second phase, which is dive phase. Now it is anyway. And, or at least it was when I went through. And so now you're testing if that person who was tough enough to be here now is comfortable in the water. Okay. So you can get people and you can train them up a little bit. And I think they've gotten a little better about this over the years. Whereas like when I went through, and certainly before I went through, it was more like, okay, we have this guy, he's proven he's tough enough to be here. Oh, but he failed some water thing, whatever it might be, dive thing, shit, whatever it is. And now I think they take a little more time to try to train that person up rather than just you got your couple chances and you're gone. And that's probably good, I guess. So yeah, so you're doing that. You are doing these weed outs. So you're doing that. Okay, now we have this person who's fairly tough, so they have that mental fortitude. Now, do they also comfortable in the water? Okay, dive phase, yes. Now we move into third phase. Okay, now are they safe with weapons and demolition? So you have that as well. So less people, I think, gonna fail out or drop out along the way. And then as you're going, though, you have to continue to improve. So the times for runs, for swims, for obstacle courses all drop. And then you also have academics you have to do, especially with the charges when you're building charges for demolition or you're doing the dive stuff. So it's a pretty good test, but they don't test for character. Whereas the Israeli Special Forces, it's called Flotilla 13, they actually test for character. So they'll do things like during their Hell Week, they'll give everybody a paddle and say, hey, dig a foxhole for yourself and one for the group. And they'll watch and see who starts digging one for themselves first and who does the group one first. And it's not necessarily that you're going to kick those people out, but it's a data point. And then they'll make it very easy, let's say, and I have not seen it in person. That's the one thing I wish I could have done, is gone over there and observed that training in the SEAL teams. But they'll do something along the lines of, there's a long run and it's Thursday night or something like that. And they've been up for a long time and they're tired, they're exhausted, and they have to fill a pack with sand and make it through these different maybe checkpoints or get to the end. And they make it very easy for you to start this, let's say 5-mile trek, to dump out that sand, and very easy to put it back in, stop another spot before you finish, put it back in. And they probably changed all this, by the way, but you'll just understand it's just the gist of it. And so then you get to the end and they ask you, hey, did you dump out your sand and fill it back up? And what's important isn't if you did it or not. The important thing is how you answer that question, if you're honest with them. So they are testing for character, whereas we don't necessarily do that. I think it's one of the failings of our program.
Interesting. You know, I had an old business partner, and he had the Coke can test. Have you heard this? Where you leave a crushed up Coke.
Oh, what is it? Yeah, tell me.
You leave a crushed up Coke can on the way to his office for the interview, and a trash can nearby, and he just sees if someone picks it up, or it's like in the lobby. It's a little ways away. And anyway, he goes in and just watches and to see like, oh, did you pick it up, and just throw it away. And that's the test. And so he's like, look, it's not a total data. It's not not a pass or fail thing, but he just goes, oh, it's interesting. If you were courteous and conscientious enough to pick up a Coke can and throw it away, he goes, he found that those people who passed that test over time were the ones who made some of the best employees and looked out for other people. And something as simple as like, oh, there's litter on the ground, let me help out with that.
Interesting. In my mind, immediately it goes to someone just out of Iraq or Afghanistan that would be like, oh, could be an IED. I'm stay away from. It's possible.
You're trying to trigger someone. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm curious. You mentioned that a lot of guys have a tough time transitioning, out of the forces. And this is in no way, at all, I would say a comparison. But I know personally, I had a tough time coming out of football, where and it's in some ways very military regimen. And it's just like your whole life is occupied by this physical activity and your identity is tied up in this. And then when you're suddenly done with it, because there's an expiration date on all of us for this. And I found myself just like really having one foot in each world for a while and looking back, and I wasn't even a pro or anything. So I can't imagine if this was like actually my job and stuff. So talk a little bit about that. Is that something you see a lot, and how do you help folks like that?
Yeah, and it can be anything. My experience obviously is military, and people talk about military transition to the private sector quite a bit, but it could be anything in life. Everybody's going to switch jobs or experience something, a breakup, a death of a loved one, a divorce, any sort of transition in life. Going to get fired, going to try something, it's not going to work. And there's going to be all sorts of transitions, and so I think regardless of what you're doing in life, these things help. But what I think helped me was that I recognized other people having trouble. So I recognized, okay, and I got to observe during my last couple of years in. I went to the BUDS and was the operations officer at our training command as I was getting out. So I got a front row seat to people who got out and then would call me and say, hey, can I give my new boss a tour of BUDS? And I'd always make sure I could make that happen. Do it even if the people above me said, no, we're not doing that or whatever. I'd always hook it up on the side somehow, just try to help these guys out. But I saw I wonder if that's healthy. Is it healthy to keep that foot so firmly planted in the past rather than build off that foundation? It's just how I looked at it. And I'm not saying this is the right way to do anything. It's just the way I looked at it. So I looked at that as, hey, this is a foundation that I've built over the last 20 years at that point. The reading is foundational for my entire life, fiction and non. But you are the accumulation of all your experiences, and now it's time to move on to build that next part of this building, of this structure as I go forward. And if I keep a foot stuck in that cement, it's going to be very difficult to continue to build this thing. So for me, it was important to be able to articulate what was important and what was not. Probably more important to articulate what was not important to me moving forward, and to also be able to identify that my next mission in life and my passion, and then figure out if I could combine those to give me purpose going forward. So for me, my mission is taking care of my family. We have a middle child with severe special needs who needs 24/7 full-time care forever. So my mission is taking care of my family, and also raising the other kids and having a family where their sole memory of their childhood isn't just on their brother, if that makes sense. To be able to show everybody the attention and to have special times with everybody and do that. But also know that I'm going to have to care for this one child for a lifetime of full-time care. So that's my mission. My family is my mission. What's my passion? Writing. Okay, I knew that since I was a little kid. And now, so if I combine those things, that gives me purpose going forward. So when I'm writing these books, I have my first nonfiction coming out in the fall of the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing. I have a spin-off show, starting True Believer soon, a couple other Hollywood projects, a couple other projects also that haven't been announced yet. And so as I'm doing all that, I guess motivation or inspiration for that is knowing that I'm going to be taking care of this, our child, for forever. But my passion, I'm doing my passion. I'm doing that through this passion. And that gives me this purpose as I sit down here to type, or I'm thinking out these storylines, or I'm just working on whatever I happen to be doing. So I think being able to identify those things as you're transitioning out of something into something else. Okay, what's my next mission? Okay, here it is. And what's my passion? Okay, got it. Well, can I combine those two? Oh, wow, I can't. Or just figuring that out. And then also being able to articulate what's important to you. So for me, it was freedom. I've been in this institution for 20 years that doesn't put a premium on freedom, even though you're fighting for it. And so for me, controlling my own schedule, not having a boss, never having a resume, never handing anyone a card, those things were very important to me. Financial freedom coupled with that. So so it's important to have a contingency plan. So I was all in on writing, but I knew I had some people I could reach out to if I needed to get into the world of finance or whatever it was. I knew I'd be miserable, so I didn't really think about those things. But even if I got that offer that said, hey, you moved to this city and here's the starting pay and here's this and that, oh my gosh, financial freedom. But if it didn't have that schedule attached to it, nope. Easy, no. I don't even have to talk to my wife about it because we've already talked about this together. So we don't have to say, oh, we have to move. Oh, we got to go to Oklahoma. Where are we going to go? Let's go fly out there, check it out. Let's meet people. Let's check out the schools. Let's look at that. That's all bandwidth that's not going into the book. That's not going into this passion. That's not helping me move the mission. And so for me, being able to articulate what was important and what was not, I think that can be a very important thing as you're moving out of any stage of life into another one. So, and I'm not saying these are right. These are just the things that I did, or that I thought about as I was moving into this next chapter.
Now, I'm curious, now that you're in Hollywood, like, does your SEAL precision and punctuality and clear chain of hierarchy conflict with the wild world of Hollywood, where things are basically ordered chaos and don't follow any sort of rational set of rules? You said this on the show, and I said, this is a man who knows now that it is such a miracle when anything happens and the variables line up. I mean, it is absolutely astounding that anything gets made, and you have some of the heaviest hitters in the business pushing it forward. So I'm like, I try not to be discouraged. I was like, but it's so crazy, right? I mean, I'm curious. So being in the military, did you come into Hollywood and be like, wait, what is this hurry up and wait phenomena?
No, there's a lot of hurry up and wait in the military. I saw a lot of similarities, actually.
Really? Okay.
But yeah, the surprise. My takeaways were, one, that anything gets made, and two, that anything good gets made. Because when it's a book, when I'm sitting here writing, there's a lot of pressure because it's only me. And so I'm writing this, but I have to honor the story. And if I honor the story, then I'm respecting people who are spending time with me that they're never going to get back. But that's all me. Now, when we're doing these scripts, that's a showrunner. That's a number one in the writer's room. That's an entire writer's room. That's notes from people up and down the chain of command, all the way to the top of Amazon and back down through another intermediary production company. The actors as well for their characters, especially if they're EPs. So all of these things. And then once you get to set, oh my goodness, then there's a whole nother set of variables right there with like 350 people on this set making this thing work. So when I walked onto set for the first day, then I was like, oh wow, this really is like a military unit. Look over here, we have Antoine Fuqua, the director. He's like the commanding officer at the top. Oh, there's Chris Pratt, the number one on the call sheet. He's like the troop commander, which he's actually playing in the show. So he's setting that like tact. So those guys are setting like this strategic and tactical level tone for everyone on set. So I saw that. And then I saw craft food services. Look, they have to feed the troops. Okay, just like in the military, we have the galley or the chow hall. Oh, look, there's the mobility person. They're in charge of moving all these vehicles all around and getting all the vehicles all set up. We have a mobility guy in the platoon. Oh, wait a second, there's the armorer. Guess what we have in the SEAL teams? Also an armorer, and keeping track of all these things. So you have all these different, hey, there's medical people on set. There's the explosive person. And in this platoon, you have your breacher in charge of all the breaching stuff and in charge of all the explosives. So it's a lot of similarities when I got on set, just looking around, all those things stood out to me. But yeah, it's wild. And to see it all come together. And we got very fortunate with Antoine, with Chris, with our showrunner, David Agilio, amazing. But so many people came up on set to me and said that they've been on hundreds of Hollywood sets and have never felt this way on any of them. And that's all due to Chris and Antoine at the top, setting the tone for everybody else. Everybody from hair and makeup to craft food services to everybody on set just felt like they were contributing, which made them bring their A game, of course, because they want to be there. They want to be part of this thing. And it was just such a great feeling and to be there. And now being back on set a few weeks ago in LA for the spinoff, everybody's back together and most of the same crew is also back. And they're just so excited to be back working with this team. And once again, that's due to Antoine and to Chris and to David Agilio right there at the top every day. And then my friend Jared Shaw, who gave Chris the novel to begin with. He's a executive producer, a writer, technical advisor, and actor on the show. And he's there. Raymond Doza, another buddy from the SEAL teams, is there, and he's the technical advisor. So it's like a SEAL reunion on set as well, which is fantastic.
That's so cool. Now, you have a new book coming out because obviously you're getting some press out about this, et cetera. So tell us about latest book, and then we can finish just a little blurb on your kind of writing style, et cetera, because I love hearing your very linear process. But tell us about the latest book coming out.
Yeah, so Red Sky Morning comes out June 18th, and it is the 7th novel. I can't believe 7 already in the James Reese Terminalist series. So this one really explores AI, future of warfare, and it deals with China, and so it's very timely. All the books have ended
Do you
up.
mention China specifically, like, or is it the enemy, like in Top Gun?
Oh, it's China. Yeah, they won't be buying this book in Barnes and Noble China. Barnes and Noble Beijing will not be carrying this book. That's for sure.
A severely redacted version of it.
Yeah, all these black pages as you go through. No, but it's really about loyalty at its base level. It's about loyalty. But the characters are back. James Reese is back. All the characters that people are really identifying with are back. And I think it's my best yet. It's my favorite so far. Thus far, every book I've done has been my favorite. But I think someone asked me this the other day, and they asked why. And I was like, oh, that's a good question. And I think it's because I feel like I'm improving with each one, which is always my goal. It's always to improve, always to move forward, both personally and then move the genre forward. It's just by a degree. But I feel like that's what I owe my audience and readership, is obviously fully into the story, all my heart and soul into every word, but also to be improving as I move forward with each and every endeavor, each and every project, each and every book. And I feel like I've done that thus far. And so I think this is my favorite. And as the 007th book, there are a lot of nods to James Bond in this one. So it's Ian Fleming. So there'll be some for anybody who's just a casual fan of Bond or seen a couple movies. And then there's some tough ones in there for even people that have read all Fleming, seen all the movies, and really are just in that lifestyle of knowing all the Bond trivia and history and everything. There'll even be some that'll tough for them to figure out, I think. So that was a lot of fun.
Cool.
Well.
Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it was Meryl Streep gave an interview one time, and she said she's terrified before every project. And after you do a big hit, and even no matter how much your first one was a success, I'm currently writing season 2 of our podcast. And it's funny, I had so much confidence finishing. And then suddenly the thought came in, like, can you do this again? Like, do you have did you use everything up in it? And thankfully, a lot of my mentors and friends have said, don't worry, that's fairly normative. Did you have any psychology like that after your first one?
No, I think you're supposed to say that you do, but I did not.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, no, I don't know why. I think it's just because I feel like I could not be more prepared for what I'm doing now. For all the books that I read growing up, it's not like I woke up at age 42, 43 and decided to be an author and then asked myself the question, hey, what should I have been reading my whole life in order to prepare me for this? And then gone and tracked those books down and read them through the lens of somebody who's reading them for a purpose. my purpose in reading all those books growing up my whole life was just the magic in those pages. And so there wasn't all these filters, maybe cynicism that builds up over time, or whatever, distractions, certainly less distractions, because you're reading this at 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and there's no internet and there's no social media. You can only play Atari 2600 for so long. There's all those. So I would feel very fortunate that I got to read those books at the time in which I did, when I'm also reading all the nonfiction I can possibly read, even at those young ages, on Vietnam, what's happening with Iran and Contra. I was fascinated by that in the summer of those hearings. I read Newsweek and Time Magazine, anything that had to do with the military when those crossed over our kitchen table at home. The Falkland Islands War, reading about that. I remember Marshall Cronkite counting down the days of the Iran hostage crisis. All of those things were very impactful to me growing up. So I'm reading all the nonfiction, I'm reading all the fiction, but I'm not reading it like for a purpose other than to read it, to make me a better person, a better citizen. When I'm talking about history type stuff, I'm just reading it for the joy in these pages of these thrillers. And I'm watching movies not so I can go, oh, you know what worked there? I see what really worked for James Cameron in this one. Okay, I'm going to tuck that away. No, I'm just in there as a fan enjoying it. And I'm watching Magnum, I'm watching The Fall Guy, I'm watching Airwolf, and I'm watching Riptide and Miami Vice. I'm watching all these great shows back in the
Miami Vice
that are having an impact on me because of the power of popular culture. So I did put in all those foundational elements that I don't think I could have possibly read any more, or watched any more movies, or read any more nonfiction, or tracked down any more nonfiction about what I was going to do later in life in the SEAL teams, history of warfare in general. So I feel like I was as prepared as possible. So maybe that's why. And at the same time, I realize that it could totally fail. But if I honor the story, then even if people hate it, at least I have honored the story. And that's what I'm doing. I'm not worried about, hey, are people into short chapters or long chapters now? Okay, what's going to be popular in the news, or what's popular right now? No, zero thought goes into any of that. It is all about the story for me.
Do you find it's getting tougher to come up with existential stakes? I was joking about this with a friend where I was like, we were developing something. I said, no biological weapons, no nuclear warheads under rogue terrorist control. And I was like, there's only so many ways the world is going to cataclysmically end. No environmental disaster. And I'm like, the same three are like happening. And so part of me goes, I think we have it a lot tougher now because so much has been done. Do you feel that way at all?
I guess a little bit. And so in starting out, I knew that I wanted to go back and forth between intensely personal storylines and like a save the world type storylines, and then back to something intensely personal, and then back. So I did think, and it didn't really work out that way. It did for the first, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth, and then it blended a little bit with some save the world and personal together for 2 in a row. So it was natural, but I did think about it. But as I'm writing some of these things, naturally, as I'm writing the outlines and my 1-page executive summary and all that stuff, and I'm internalizing it and thinking it, coming up with a theme. Each book has its own theme to keep me on track as I go. I do think about, okay, is this going to be more personal, or is this going to be more save the world? And the ones that are more save the world have proven to be very research intensive. When I'm researching these things, like for this last book, it's passive targeting, it's hypersonic weapons, it's AI, it's quantum computers, stuff that I don't have a touch point with in the military or personally from anywhere else other than the research that I'm doing for the novels. And I want someone who works in those spaces to read the book or listen to it and say, oh, this guy at least put in the effort. It might not be exactly right, but this guy, I can tell that he put in the effort. And I appreciate that as someone who works with quantum computers, something along those lines. It was very intensive, a finance portion, and how people create generational wealth, and how I think I'm still recovering from that research, because I wanted someone who spent their life on Wall Street, that knows the lingo and all that stuff, to be able to read that and say, oh, wow, wonder who this guy talked to. Either using the language that I understand, because he must have talked to somebody. And then I did. I talked to 2 guys who lived on Wall Street essentially their whole life since the 90s.
Was it Gordon Gekko, by the way? Did you call Michael Douglas?
Right at the end of kind of that era, and coming up and still hearing those stories, I guess, through the 90s and then up to today. So I got an intense schooling education on the finance side of the house for the last book, and then this book back to that quantum computing and all these different weapon systems between the U.S. and China, essentially. So I got schooled up on that big time.
Look at that. Well, and see, now you can add quantum computing and credit default swaps, and you've opened up a lucrative brokering practice, it sounds like, on the side after this. So that's
I feel like I could have after the last book, after all that. But like this one, I feel like I could fly. This was a plane in this one. And it's a plane I wanted to put in a book since the summer of 1985 when I read a book that had this plane in it. And I told myself that one day I will write a book that has this plane in it. And I do. It's actually on the cover of the book. And I feel like it's an old plane, old aircraft. And so I feel like with all the research I did that I might be able to get in this thing and actually fly it. And I wanted to go out to Florida where a guy I was talking to about it, where he has one, and it's his dad was a guru as far as these old planes are concerned. It's Lake Buccaneers, and it's an amphibious plane. And I feel like I could get in there and maybe get off the lake or get off the ocean.
It worked in Top Gun. They had a Tomcat just sitting on the runway in the enemy's territory, and they just hopped in.
Go. What they're doing though? I'm not even a pilot. I just play one on TV. Tom Cruise is awesome. Pilot.
I know, right? Actually, I read that he actually was like, it was actually a debate of whether he was going to get to fly it. And I think what I read was the insurance was too bad. Like they were like, there's no way, we just can't let a civilian fly this plane. And I thought, man, the fact that they didn't just like say outright no, I was like, that's a testament to, if you saw the video of him taking James Corden and inverted, I'm like, this is
amazing.
I mean, he's a legend. Well, yeah. He's a legend.
I mean, he probably switched insurance companies because then the next year they let him drive that motorcycle multiple times. I think it was like 20, 30 times off that cliff. I think they did it somewhere up in Northern Europe and then do the free fall after that, base jump off the motorcycle, essentially.
He is on a different list that I'm not on, and it's crazy. Well, I like to end on a positive note here of just advice you'd give. You know, obviously no writers are the same. You read about folks who just show up and just start writing, and then Patterson in his master class is like, oh, I've outlined and note carded and and by the time I type, the story's basically done. Could you give us maybe a little two-part here, just a little bit of your writing, a day in the life of Jack Carr writing, and then your advice for anyone else who is just crazy enough to get started and want to follow in your footsteps?
I feel like I should watch the master class. I didn't know that Patterson had one.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. He opens it up saying, hello, I'm Stephen King, right?
Hilarious.
And he's like, see, a good opening line can get you.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
It's really funny.
That's good. Yeah, I just know that like right now, all the time is into all these projects. So I'm just going. So I figure like my master class was all the books that I read throughout my entire life. That was my master class. But I'm curious, he probably has a couple of nuggets out there. I think who else has? David Baldacci has one. Lee Child has a master class.
And Neil Gaiman has one that's fantastic. They're all so different though. That's the beautiful part. We interviewed Joe Lansdale on here too, and he's like, I write for like 2 hours a day, and I just show up, and he's like, on my writing process too is I read other people's books and I watch TV because it's inspiring me. And I thought, oh, I can Netflix as part of my creative journey. He's like, of course.
Yeah. No, interesting. I was watching it. I finally, because I was working for the last 4 months, just all in on this book. Ended up being a lot longer than I thought. So hence I had to move the publication date from May to June because I was still going. The story just called for it. I'm not going to ever just stop at 100,000 words, 110,000 words. Got to honor that story and keep going and however long it takes. But when I was done and I'd sent it in, I was finally sitting down to watch a show with my wife. We hadn't watched a show or gone out to dinner for like 4 months, and we're watching something. And for some reason, it wasn't even what the show was about, but just for whatever reason, something popped in my head. I'm like, oh, hold on. Ran back upstairs to this office, and I added a paragraph to the end of the book. And I was like, oh, that's kind of what it was, this one little tie-in that it was missing from the beginning. And it's just a little thing. Maybe most people won't even notice it. But so it does. So I understand how movies and TV and just reading other things will lead to ideas and help continue to build that foundation. But the day in the life and advice, yeah, well, one, fiction is different than nonfiction. Nonfiction is you can get, they'll pay you to do that job, essentially. Whereas fiction, you have to have it done first if you're just starting. You have to have the entire book first done. It has to be as good as you can possibly make it. So those things are a little bit different. So the advice for someone who wants to write in the thriller genre is to do that, is to not worry about anything else until you have that, because you have to. That's just how it works. And no one's going to say, hey, that's a great idea. A political thriller about a spy? Go write that. We're going to give you X number of dollars to spend the next year writing that.
Genius.
It does not work that way. You have to actually write the thing and then get it to someone who actually says, oh, this is wonderful. Let's publish this. So doing that. But for me, my process, I like to start with a title. because I don't like to waste any bandwidth worrying about that as I'm typing away. I like to know, oh, I got another great title. Or even if it might change, like at least I've got a title. Okay, it's not just book 7. There's a title attached to it. So now I'm not thinking about that right now. It's all about that story. Then I write a 1-page executive summary, kind of a letter to myself, and ask myself, hey, is this worth the next year and a half of my life? And if the answer is yes, then I read it again and ask, is it interesting enough for them to want to spend time on these pages, time that they're never going to get back? And if I think that answer is yes, then that's my project. That's the book. And I take that 1-page executive summary, turn that into an outline. And I guess you're saying that Patterson's are very detailed. And mine are detailed enough, but I don't want to get stalled out in the outline. I don't want that to be the thing that is holding me back from doing the actual writing. So usually I have the prologue. I know how it's going to start. I know where I'm going. I know how it's going to end. I know a few things that happen in between. So I break that up usually into 3, even though the last one was more than 3 parts. And even if I get to something where I'm stumped a little bit, and I'm like, oh man, how's he going to get out of this? How's the reader ever going to buy this? Or anything like that. I don't spend any more time. I know that I have a year to figure that out because I'm not downrange. I'm not under fire. The decisions I make don't result in people coming home in body bags. Guess what? I can sleep on this. I can think this through. I have a year to figure out how to solve this problem on the page. And so I don't let that stall me out. So I'll get that as detailed as possible. And then I start writing. And as I'm writing, things change and evolve, and I'm doing research, which adds or subtracts or whatever else it's going to do to help that story make it the best that it can possibly be. And then get through that and then start reading it from the reader's perspective. So I print them off. And so now I'm not on my computer typing away. I print off it, whether it's by section or the entire thing all together, and bind it. And then I sit down and go to a different room where I'm not typing on the computer, and go to a different room, have my red pen right here, and I go through it from the reader's perspective and try to read it as a fan and see what's working, what's not. And I just have this taking notes and crossing things out, circling words that are repetitious, whatever it might be. Oh, I need a little more of this. Hey, I need another chapter with this guy earlier, and just start making my notes, and then take those, put those into the draft on the computer, and then send that off to New York for my editor. So that's the process thus far. And so far it's working. I always want to evolve, so I should probably watch some of these master classes and see if I can get a couple little hints about how to make things more efficient. But for me, that's been working.
We hear that, masterclass. We have a 7-time bestseller, and the guy who has Chris Pratt's #1 hit TV show on Amazon Prime is offering to do a masterclass. Pick up that phone. Operators are standing by for a deal of a lifetime.
Standing by.
So we have gone over the extract. We've missed the first extraction. We are due now. Headquarters has called in and said, get him out now. So Jack Carr, thank you so much for joining us. Your wisdom, your work, your service. We appreciate you. And we do hope this book just continues to blow up and great success for you. We're excited to see these spinoffs.
Hey man, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I always, as you can tell, I love talking about books, movies, films, and all that. So it's been a pleasure.